All right, anyone who'd like to join in on Children's Church, they're heading out this door right now. That's where all the fun will be. All right, well, we're studying the book of Haggai. Is it Haggai? That's how my third grade Sunday school teacher pronounced it. Or Haggai.
Haggai.
2 syllables, Haggai. Because we're in the South, you're supposed to make more syllables just for the kicks, I can drag it out. So I don't know what to call him, but this guy wrote an interesting book. And I think we're going to learn some neat things from it. It's one that we usually miss. You may recall some weeks ago we did some emphasis on sort of the second half of the Old Testament, what's often referred to as the minor prophets. That they're not like less important, they're just little books. You know, Isaiah is hard to miss, but these little ones like Haggai, that was pretty good. Only 2 chapters. You know, it's easy to flip right by if you're going quickly, and so we rarely study it, but some really neat stuff here. So I'd want to read just one little. We're actually going to look at virtually the entire book today, not word for word, but overall. But I just want to kind of focus in on one part of it for starters, I guess. In the 2nd year of King Darius, on the 1st day of the 6th month, the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah. I should have gotten someone volunteer to read this. Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. I mean, this is what the Lord Almighty says. These people say the time has not yet come for the Lord's house to be built. Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while this house remains a ruin? Now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. You have planted much, but harvested little. You eat, but never have enough. Drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but are not warm. You earn wages, only to put them in a purse with holes in it. This sounds like me. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. Go up into the mountains, bring down timber, and build the house, so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored, says the Lord. You expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home, I blew away. Why, declares the Lord Almighty? Because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with his own house. Therefore, because of you, the heavens have withheld their dew and the earth its crops. I called for a drought on the fields and the mountains and on the grain, the new wine, the oil, and whatever the ground produces, on men and cattle, and on the labor of your hands. May God add his blessing to the reading and hearing of his word. Before I get into this, I want to tell you a quick story. And if my father-in-law ever comes to visit, you just have to act like you never heard this from me. But he's an old schooler. He was a Marine. Well, I mean, he is a Marine. Once you're a Marine, it's not like you quit, right? He is a Marine, and he's a take care of it kind of guy. Well, we had just moved in to our first parsonage when, it was forever ago, in this little town of Calypso, North Carolina. How many of you have been down to Calypso? It's just a little past Botanicus. Cute little town, not quite as charming as Urbanna, but size-wise, very similar, about 1 square mile. And we were moving in, and Tracy thought, we need a ceiling fan here in this main room, because she gets hot easily, and of course, I can't fix anything. And her dad's like, I got this. Step aside, Junior. Daddy's taking care of this. And so he comes in, and since I'm not a fix-it guy, I am very devoted to instruction booklets, and so I'm reading every word, and he's like, I got this. I've done this 100 times. You already see how this is going to go. And so he pulls it out, and of course it's an older house, so who knows how all the wiring and what. So he gets in and does all this, and then at some point there's something that doesn't quite fit, and he's shoving. He may have sworn a couple times, or 10, and got really frustrated and all this. And I couldn't say it out loud because I was grateful and feared for my life, but yeah. I wanted to say, we could read the instructions. You know, we could look at how it's supposed to work. And so we finished, did 2 of them actually, in 2 different, there was kind of a, the entry room, and then there's another room over here. And we discovered that whenever you clicked the remote, it did both of them. So you couldn't, see, even today, I'm getting kind of this cold sweat breaking out, just like, all you had to do was read the instructions. And see that you have to flip this little switch so that they're on different lines so that you can control them separately. So how many hundreds of times did we try to turn one light off and this one went on? And all he had to do was read the instructions. Wouldn't that have been easier? I'll never say that to his face. But see, that came to mind when God's here talking to Israel, and he's saying, give careful thought to what you're doing. Give careful thought to this. Think about how you're lining stuff up. You're planting but not harvesting. You're eating but you're never full. You drink but you're not. It's not satisfying. Your clothes don't keep you warm. Your money goes right through your pockets. And this makes me think, of us and the modern church. And we're looking at these people, God's people, and God's saying, you're working hard but not accomplishing what you intend to accomplish, right? And so that makes me immediately, as a pastor, that my first thought is, well, what are we working on that's not fruitful? What are the things I personally and us as a group, what are we doing where we feel like, gosh, I'm working and nothing's happening here? So as we move through this, I hope you'll kind of start thinking, what are the things in my life, at church or at home, at work, wherever, things where I feel like I'm getting frustrated because I'm putting effort in and not getting the outcome that I was looking for. These people kind of dug the hole for themselves because they decided on their projects at the expense of God's projects, right? God had certain things he wanted them working on, and they thought, well, but this seems really important to me. And because their priorities got out of whack, because they were busily working on their own houses and leaving God's house a shambles, they were focused on their own priorities, their own comfort, and they were giving their attention to that. God received none, and so because of that getting out of whack, they weren't accomplishing anything. Whatever they focused on, they weren't achieving. So again, we just need to think about our lives, our church, and think, what are we working on? We work and don't seem to be getting anywhere. I'm pretty sure if Haggai was here, he'd say, just give some careful thought to your ways. If it's not working, something's off. And see, we think we're doing everything right, partly because we hate being wrong. But none of us wants to say, well, I'm terrible at this. We like to feel good about ourselves and good about our efforts. So we think we're doing things right. But, we could bring in some of the leaders of Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State, and they'd say, of course we're doing what's right and what God wants us to do. You see, so just thinking it isn't quite enough, right? Just thinking it's true isn't quite right. We can think we've gotten a recipe exactly right, but you don't know till you taste it, right? You don't know that's the old saying, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. It doesn't matter how pretty it looks. It doesn't matter how it smells. It doesn't matter what you believe about that thing. What matters is, does it taste good when you finish? And just as a side note, the things that our kitchen team produces always taste good. But I'm just saying, have you ever traveled abroad? Europeans are bad about this. They make these beautiful desserts that don't taste like anything. It's like, why bother having a dessert? I can't get into that. But I'm just saying, looks are not everything. We can think we did it right. We can think that our oven heats evenly. We can think all of our ingredients are fresh. We can believe that spices don't ever go bad. We can believe that the dates printed on milk don't mean anything. You can believe what you want. But you have to look at the outcome. Do you get the dish that you were working for, or do you get something that tastes weird? That's the test. Tracy and I read some time ago, it's been a good while now, a man decided this, the beginning tells the whole story. The man decided to help in the kitchen. How's that going to go well? That's an old, anyway, that was very stereotypical of me, wasn't it? Guys can cook just as well as women can, with a lot of practice and a good microwave. And so this guy, he's like, I'm going to be helpful. I'll chop some stuff up. Well, who knows how this happened, but he mistook some flower bulbs for onions. Chops them up, adds them in. Have you eaten a flower bulb? You seem to know what's coming here. Apparently, flower bulbs are not meant to be ingested. Did you know that? So, but everything looks great. It smells great. They've got a dinner party. They're celebrating some special thing. They got their daughter and her new husband and friends. And everyone who took a bite of that dish began vomiting uncontrollably. The guy who decided to linger on his appetizer declared it the best dinner party ever. It didn't matter that they thought they did it right. Right? See, the guy was, I did everything I was supposed to. It doesn't matter if you think that it's right. What they had to do was go back and say, okay, obviously something didn't work. Let's go back and figure out the problem. And that's what led them to the flower bulbs. There was this young man that I knew once who decided he was going to be adventurous and try to make his mom spoon rolls, which were one of his lifelong favorites at Thanksgiving dinner. And this young man believed that baking powder and baking soda were the same thing. I know you feel sorry for him, don't you? And I'm glad he told me this story. They smelled great, they looked great, but they tasted kind of weird and were a little gritty. It was an epic disaster, but that guy never forgot that baking powder and baking soda are different things. And I would never have known if he hadn't confided in me. So we need to think. We need to think about the outcomes we're pursuing. What are we in it for? Whether, again, home or church. What are the things that we care most about? Now, remember, the Israelites, the people that Haggai was talking to, it was a different time, a different place. They were very agrarian. Their crops and their animals were everything. That was their market and their Walmart and everything rolled into one. So they cared about their harvest, about raising food, about having enough to get them through the winter, having enough clothes so that they didn't freeze, having enough to drink so that they didn't die. That's what they worried about. So it's maybe a little different for us. We do want to have food to eat. We do want clothes. But we worry about more things. We worry about the balance in our bank account. We worry about relationships and how healthy they are. We worry about our kids. Are they going to be well adjusted? Are they adopting the faith? We worry about our church. So we need to think, in their case, the people of Israel were mostly concerned about, basic survival things. But what are the things that are important to us? What are the things that we could take a look at, I guess? Should we be looking at our bank accounts or our budget numbers, our attendance, our evangelism participation, our missions participation? If we measure the number of shoeboxes we produce, we're going to feel good about how things are going. Maybe other numbers we wouldn't be as happy about. Are we getting good attendance at our discipleship programs? Do we have people, giving regularly? And that's why, God is saying, and he said it twice just in the little part that I read, give careful thought. You're getting frustrated in the things you're pursuing, and working harder and harder at the same thing isn't the answer. You can't just keep doing the same thing over and over when you're accomplishing less and less. Think about it and put the pieces together. I mean, I hope any of us, if we did any given thing and it turned out to be a disaster, that we would think, maybe I'll go back and read the instructions and give it another shot, instead of doing the same thing over and over. I mean, we could believe we were handling relationships the right way, but if they just keep going south or blowing up in our faces, we got to eventually go back to the drawing board and think about it. If we were sure we were doing those math problems right but kept getting the answers wrong, we got to go back and think, okay, well, I'm missing something here. We have to at least consider that something's off. So what if we're working and working at our relationship with God and we still feel this distance, like we're not in the right spot? What does that mean? And what should we do about it? What if we're working and working at building our church and it just doesn't seem to be taking? What if we're working and working to reach the younger generation and they're just not showing up? What if we're trying to spread the gospel and people just aren't responding? We need to think about where we're getting that frustration. Because, in all honesty, most churches see these issues and they say, let's do the same thing harder. That is the typical answer. I've seen it over and over. So, back to our text. So God starts spelling things out. You know, he starts off by saying, look, is this the time to be working on your own stuff when my stuff needs some work? Is this really the time? Go up in the mountains, get you some lumber, and start the job that's right. The thing that should come first. Do that first. He said, if you gave it careful thought, you'd figure out the cause and effect here. You'd figure out what was going wrong, and you'd be running up into the mountains to find that timber. If you just think about it, you expected so much. You came away with little. Whatever you brought home, this is really powerful. Whatever you brought home, I blew away. Why? Because my house is a ruin, and all you care about is your own space. This had to be really sobering for Israel. I mean, here they were God's people. We've talked about that many times, and this wasn't a recession or bad luck. God was blocking their path to success. Not just for kicks, but because of them. You know, he clearly says, because of you, this has happened. These were the consequences of their choices and their failure to keep their priorities straight. So again, it was the work of God's hands, but caused by the people's own choices. And so I'm still not sure. You know, I know what a drought means in general, like when it just doesn't rain, and I know what that does to fields and grain, but a drought on men and cattle and on the labor of your hands. And I'm just getting this picture of just everything they loved, everything they worked on, everything they cared about, just drying up and shriveling and become completely unproductive. So can you see how that, you know, we're not all farmers, so we have to kind of adapt this metaphor to ourselves. Now, back when I, taught college classes and tried to connect bright-eyed 17 and 18-year-olds to the real world, we would talk about learning and how learning takes place. And one of the questions I would always ask them is, what do you mean when you look at somebody and say, he never learns? What does that literally mean? What are we thinking when we say that? And it boils down to when we see someone who does something and experiences the consequence but never figures out how choice leads to consequence. That's not learning, right? The person who gets fired from 7 straight jobs and is just like, I don't know what's happening. Instead of what's going wrong. Oh, I do this and then this happened. The person who at about the 2-month the 2-month mark, every relationship just blows up in their face, and they're like, I know what did she want from me? Right? And they're not learning. They're not learning because they're not seeing how things go together. And hopefully, most of us are not quite that clueless. We're all to a degree, and we may have our blind spots. but we tend to be very acutely aware of cause and effect, to the extent that we'll kind of make it up sometimes. That's where superstitions come from, where we say, hey, that happened, and I wore these socks today. It must be the socks. That's what a baseball player would say, at least. But if you eat something and get violently ill, you're not going to eat that thing again, right? Because you're going to say, yes, eating day-old waffle fries, bad. Right, that was a college thing. I did try it. I hated to throw food away back then. If we take a certain route and the traffic's terrible, we're going to avoid that. Like the time I was driving down here and went down that street and got behind a car. It was terrible. I don't go there anymore. But we notice these connections. We see how A and B are connected, and we pay attention because we want to be able to change things and to impact things in a positive way. And there's just no way all of Israel was clueless. I mean, some of them, yes, as a people, they were pretty shaky, but there had to be people who could say, I think I see what's going on here. Now, again, the prophets might disagree with me on this. They might say, no, really, they couldn't figure it all out. I think they were capable of connecting A to B, of seeing choice and consequence and how they went together. I think they were capable, but I think the idea of being wrong was too upsetting to them. Does that sound fair? And this has probably happened to you. I know I've seen this in myself. Just the idea of having invested all my time and energy in this and it being a complete waste, so I'm sticking with this. When we suffer for something, we have to believe that it was worthwhile, right? It's true. That's why hazing works. So here they are saying, gosh, we're working like crazy and our crops won't grow. We're caring for those animals. They just keep dying. We're working as hard as we can at the temple, and God says he's unhappy. Well, and you just think, surely somebody would say, are we messing up here? Should we go back and read the instructions again? But what happened was, probably the ones that thought that kept quiet because they saw what happened to prophets. They probably just kept quiet. Nobody wanted to hear that there was a possibility that Israel was off track. It's better, and again, I'm superimposing this on the text. It's what seems to be going on. It's better for us to watch our animals and crops die and struggle rather than having to come face to face with the possibility that we are doing it wrong. That seems to be what's going on here. You remember that Happy Days episode when Richie had this awesome car that didn't run? And they would push it into the parking lot and then spend all day hanging out impressing the girls. But they knew it didn't work. That was all just played for laughs. If something really doesn't work, you take it to Ed and he fixes it up and it's awesome. But if it doesn't work, I mean, really, this is Israel. Oh man, my phone's dead. Hi, Mom. You're not going to get this voicemail because my phone's dead, but I'm going to keep using it because I don't want to admit that there's a problem. Bye. Oh, man. It's harder to text when the screen won't come on. That's so dumb. Your phone's dead. You get it fixed. Whatever they were doing was not working. And what did they do? Let's just keep at it. Ha ha. So it's one thing to kind of have blind spots. We're all human. There's things, and hopefully you've had friends or a spouse or someone who could help you see those blind spots. There's just things we miss because we're human and we're us. But this is different. This isn't just something you don't notice because of your personal perspective. This is consciously and purposefully turning a blind eye. So here Israel is, they're turning away from truth and refusing to consider that their behaviors might be the problem. And prophets would come and say, hey, this isn't working. And they'd say, shut up, you. Get him out of here. We're going to keep working even harder now. And then, again, context. So they had all those warnings. The nation was destroyed, the temple torn down, the people enslaved, years and years in exile. Finally, God begins bringing his people back together. And they're like, we knew this was coming. This is awesome. We're back in it. And the thought that they were, after all of that they were doing it wrong again, they just couldn't deal with it. They were just basically doing la, 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 la. They couldn't do it. And God's saying, look, just put me in my proper place and things will go great. But as long as this keeps going, you're just going to be frustrated. And I don't want us to wait until we've lost everything that we hold dear. That's what these people are doing. He's saying, take the blinders off. Just think about it. Read the instructions. When we put God in his proper place, we put him first and our own desires and priorities after that. And things go right. When we put our priorities first, things go wrong. It's that simple. It's a formula that we can follow. So we need to give careful thought as individuals, as a church. Make sure that God's priorities, God's values are coming first. And I'll tell you, it's hard because churches have a lot of traditions. We have things we love doing, things we've always done, and things we like and things we don't like. None of that matters when it comes to what God wants. And most of the problems that I've seen in churches, they come from people saying, well, but I want. Stop right there. That should be the end of the sentence. Okay, hold on. Sorry, now that I realize what I said. No, think of all the arguments you've seen. It's about personal opinions. I can't even come up with a time where a church actually argued over pursuing God's values and priorities. It was always about the people. So we've got to make sure that we get our priorities right, that we don't make this same mistake, because it's so easy to say, well, we're God's people. We love God. We go to church. I'm even on the roll. I'm glad that I'm part of God's kingdom. I'm thrilled to be a Christian, but that doesn't protect us from self-interest. We're still human. It still happens. And it's so easy to say, I've just got a few things I need to take care of, and then I'll focus on God. I've got a few bills I need to pay off, and then I'll get serious about my giving. I've got this and I've got that. There's always something more. I got to get my kids a little older, and then I've got to get them into college, and I've got to pay off college. Oh, I've got a big road trip planned for retirement. There's always something, and it's easy to let those somethings take the place of God's priorities. Fortunately, Haggai gives us our answer, and we just need to give careful thought. We need to be willing to take the hit, if you will, because the mistake Israel made wasn't necessarily doing something wrong. We make mistakes. But then refusing to go back to the instructions and think, why is this not working? That's the mistake we cannot afford. So if we have, again, you in your life, us in our church, if there's an area where there's this frustration, where it just doesn't seem to be working, let's check priorities. Let's make sure everyone is in their proper place. And fortunately, there's a good part of this story. It's not all doom and gloom. In chapter 2, and I encourage you to go back and read this sometime, but it's all very careful about dates. So, roughly a month later, some of the people decided that they were going to get serious. They were like, okay, you know what? Now that we've heard this for the 84th time, maybe we are making a mistake here. Let's put God first. And they began collecting timber. They began rebuilding the temple. And of course, there were some who were like, well, but it's not as good as the old one. Maybe we shouldn't waste our time. Isn't that classic? And God says, keep strong, keep working. You're working on the right thing now. It's working now. Don't work harder at what doesn't work. Keep committed to what does. And in chapter 2, verse 9, God actually says, the glory of this present house will be greater than the glory of the former house. And in this place I will grant peace. He says, don't stop holding on to the past. Stop trying to think of reasons not to do it. Do it right. And it's going to be greater than anything you can imagine. And then, this is kind of the end. And it's 2 months after the original announcement. God says, okay, so you need to look back. You need to think about this. Look back on how awful everything was, how bad things were going. Everything was falling apart, right? This is chapter 2, verse 15. Now give careful thought to this from this day on. Consider how things were before one stone was laid on another in the Lord's temple. When anyone came to a heap of 20 measures, there were only 10. When anyone went to a wine vat to draw 50 measures, there were only 20. I struck all the work of your hands with blight, mildew, and hail, yet you did not turn to me. From this day on, from this 24th day of the 9th month, see how specific, give careful thought to the day when the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid. Give careful thought. Any seed left in the barn? Until now, the vine, the fig tree, the pomegranate, the olive tree have not borne fruit. From this day on, I will bless you. This is the day. And I love that. I love that image. It's like, here, go mark it on your calendar. This is the day we stepped back and read the instructions and said, we're going to do this right. And God said, watch what's going to happen. Keep track. Keep score. Because you're going to see the difference. After that day, it's going to be a new ball game. Right? And that really moved me. They thought about it. They gave it the careful thought. They did the right thing. And they were able to move ahead. And then they had that moment, that day, that mark on the calendar where they could look back and say, that's where it all changed. That was our turning point. Because we put God first. Now, one of the many reasons we celebrate communion is our gratitude to Jesus for keeping his priorities in the right order. Because if he had let self dominate, if he had put his own desires over those of God, we'd be out of luck in more ways than one, right? It was his willingness to put God in God's proper place that opened the door for us to be saved. Let's pause for a word of prayer as we prepare for communion. God, we do thank you for being a God worth putting first. We thank you for Jesus and the teachings that he delivered to us, both in word and in deed. And we thank you that he was willing to put himself last so that we would see the right way to do life. And we thank you for the opportunity to celebrate his sacrifice today. In the name of Christ, amen. My ushers would come forward, please. Jesus passed the bread around to his disciples there at the table. He broke it and said, "This is my body, broken for you. Eat in remembrance." Jesus poured the wine, and he said, "This is my blood, shed for you. Drink in remembrance." I do want to say one thing before we close. I'm always worried that you guys will think I'm beating you up just for kicks. This sermon was really not necessarily about us. I want to tell you, while I was working on this, I thought to myself, I can't put a finger on a certain box on my calendar and say this was the date, but sometime this year, I felt us turn a corner. I'm not saying everything was bad in 2016 and before, but I felt something change this year. I felt more enthusiasm, more fire. Our missions team has always done a lot of stuff, but they are going nuts, aren't they? And our deacons, So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, I don't know what it was or when it was, but somewhere in there, that's when we got something right. That doesn't mean we're perfect yet, but we're a step closer than we were, I think. I hope you felt the same thing. I think we're moving in the right direction and doing the right things and not beating our head against a wall like some churches are. So I just wanted to make sure that y'all knew that. We still all have things we need to reflect on personally and as a church, but I just wanted you to know that we're doing some things right, and I hope you can feel it. We always, on communion days, close in a special way where we sing "Blessed Be the Tie." So let's all stand and find a hand to hold on to, and let's link ourselves as the family of God.
Is
Got a couple of Williamsburg folks
Yeah,
here.
y'all come around
Good to see
here.
you.